Your dividend income has a silent partner you never agreed to work with. It does not show up on your brokerage statement. It does not send you a notification when it takes its cut. It simply arrives every single quarter, extracts its percentage before you ever see the money, and leaves you with a number that looks like your return but is quietly, systematically smaller than what your portfolio actually earned. That partner is the tax liability sitting inside every taxable dividend distribution you have received this year. And in the 2026 economic environment, where inflation is already compressing the real purchasing power of every dollar your portfolio generates, paying unnecessary tax on income you could have legally shielded is not a minor inefficiency. It is the difference between a portfolio that is actually beating inflation and one that is losing to it while the statements suggest otherwise. Before I show you the 4 specific ETFs, I need you to understand the exact mechanism that is working against you right now. Because most investors who hear the phrase tax-free income treat it as a bonus feature rather than a structural necessity. In the current environment, it is not a bonus. It is the entire margin between a real return and a real loss. Here is the math most dividend investors never complete. If your portfolio is generating a 6% yield and inflation is running at 4.5%, your real return before taxes is 1.5%. That is the actual purchasing power growth your income is producing before the government is involved. Now apply a 22% ordinary income tax rate to the distributions from a typical BDC, a high-yield bond ETF, or a REIT whose distributions are classified as ordinary income. Your 6% yield becomes 4.68% after tax. Against 4.5% inflation, your real after-tax return is 18 basis points. 18. That is not a portfolio beating inflation. That is a portfolio running on a treadmill at exactly the speed the treadmill is moving, the appearance of progress with almost none of the actual result. And for investors in the 24 or 32% bracket, that math does not produce 18 basis points of real return. It produces a negative real return. The portfolio is shrinking in real terms while the statements show income arriving on schedule. This is the 2026 economic pivot that most investors are watching from the wrong angle. The conversation happening across almost every finance platform right now is about yield. Which ETF pays the most? Which sector is offering the highest distributions? Which category has the best trailing 12-month income? That conversation is the wrong one for this specific moment. The right conversation is about after-tax, after-inflation real return. The number that actually determines whether your purchasing power is growing, holding steady, or quietly eroding, regardless of what the gross yield number on your brokerage dashboard says. And when you run that calculation correctly at the current inflation rate and the ordinary income tax rates that apply to most high-yield distributions, a large portion of the traditional dividend ETF universe is not generating real returns. It is generating the illusion of real returns, while the combination of inflation and taxation extracts the actual purchasing power faster than the income replaces it. Now here is where most investors make the second mistake. They hear tax-free income and immediately assume it means lower yield. Lower absolute yield, yes. Lower after-tax yield, no. And in an inflationary environment where every basis point of real return is doing material work in the long-term compounding outcome, that distinction is the entire thesis. Tax-equivalent yield is the calculation that corrects the misleading yield comparison between taxable and tax-free instruments. The formula is simple. Divide the municipal ETF's yield by 1 minus your marginal federal tax rate. An investor in the 24% bracket holding a municipal bond ETF yielding 3.8% is receiving the after-tax equivalent of 5% from a taxable instrument, because 5% taxed at 24% nets, the same income as 3.8% received completely tax-free. For an investor in the 32% bracket, that same 3.8% municipal yield is equivalent to 5.59% taxable. For an investor in the 37% bracket, it is 6.03% taxable equivalent. The higher the tax bracket, the more the tax-free structure compounds its advantage. And in 2026, with elevated nominal yields across the fixed income universe, the absolute dollar value of that advantage is larger than it has been at any point in the past decade. Municipal bond ETFs are the primary vehicle for this. These are funds holding debt issued by state and local governments, cities, counties, school districts, water authorities, public transit systems, whose interest income is federally tax-exempt under the Internal Revenue Code. The exemption is not a loophole. It was deliberately written into the tax code to facilitate the financing of public infrastructure and has been a foundational feature of the U.S. tax system for over a century. For residents of the issuing state, the income is often exempt from state income tax as well, which for investors in high-tax states like California, New York, or New Jersey adds another full layer of tax advantage on top of the federal exemption. The four specific categories of municipal ETFs that sit at the intersection of tax-free income, inflation resilience, and credit quality in the current environment are not interchangeable. Each has a specific function, a specific risk profile, and a specific role in a combined income structure. Understanding what each one does and what it costs in terms of duration risk, credit risk, or yield concession is what separates a tax-free income strategy that actually works from one that simply replaces one problem with another. The first is broad investment-grade national municipal bond ETFs. These funds hold diversified exposure across multiple states, multiple sectors of municipal issuance, education, healthcare, transportation, general obligation, and multiple maturity ranges within the investment-grade universe. The defining characteristic is credit quality. Investment-grade municipal issuers have revenue bases and legal structures that make default genuinely rare compared to corporate issuers at equivalent credit ratings. Municipalities can raise taxes, they can cut services, they have tools to service debt that private companies do not. The historical default rate on investment-grade municipal bonds is a fraction of the historical default rate on investment-grade corporate bonds over equivalent timeframes. For income investors who have been accepting corporate credit risk to access higher yield without fully pricing the difference in default history, the investment-grade municipal ETF represents a structural improvement in credit safety at a tax-equivalent yield that is competitive with or superior to the after-tax yield of the corporate alternative. In the current 2026 rate environment, broad investment-grade national municipal ETFs are yielding in the 3.5 to 4.2% range, which at the 24% bracket converts to a tax-equivalent yield of 4.6 to 5.5% before any state tax exemption is applied. The second is short-duration municipal ETFs, funds concentrated in the 0 to 5-year maturity range of the municipal market. Duration is the primary risk that punished fixed-income investors through the rate hiking cycle that defined the past 2 years. The longer the average maturity of a bond fund, the more its net asset value declines when interest rates rise. A fund with a 10-year average duration loses approximately 10% of its net asset value for every 1% rise in rates. A fund with a 2-year average duration loses approximately 2%. In an environment where rate uncertainty remains elevated and the Federal Reserve's trajectory through the second half of 2026 is genuinely unclear, short-duration municipal ETFs allow investors to access tax-free income while dramatically reducing the principal volatility risk that has made longer-duration bond funds difficult to hold through the current cycle. The yield concession for moving from intermediate to short duration in the municipal market is meaningful but not prohibitive. And for investors who have watched intermediate duration bond funds decline in net asset value while still generating income, the trade of modestly lower yield for significantly more stable principal is a rational one in this specific environment. The third is essential service revenue bond ETFs, funds with concentrated or tilted exposure toward municipal debt backed by the revenue streams of water utilities, sewer systems, public transportation infrastructure, electric utilities, and similar essential services. The specific advantage of essential service revenue backing is the revenue stream's immunity to the economic cycle. A water utility's billing revenue does not decline during a recession because water consumption is not discretionary. A sewer system's revenue does not disappear because consumer confidence has dropped. The contractual obligation of residents and businesses to pay for essential services creates a revenue base that backs the bond's debt service in a way that is fundamentally more predictable than a municipality's general tax revenue, which is exposed to income and sales tax collections that decline during economic downturns. For income investors who are specifically concerned about the 2026 economic environment and its potential impact on municipal credit quality broadly, tilting toward essential service revenue exposure within a tax-free ETF structure provides the most defensible income stream available in the fixed income universe. Tax-free income backed by revenue that is structurally immune to the economic scenario, most likely to cause credit deterioration elsewhere. The fourth is high-yield municipal ETFs. And here the framing is critical because the phrase high yield carries connotations from the corporate bond market that do not accurately transfer to the municipal context. Municipal defaults are historically rare even at below investment grade ratings compared to corporate defaults at equivalent ratings. The reason is structural. A corporation facing financial distress has limited tools to generate additional revenue. A municipality facing financial distress can raise property taxes, increase utility rates, cut services, negotiate with creditors from a position that includes the legal authority to compel payment from a captive geographic population. This does not mean municipal high yield is risk-free. It means the risk is categorically different from corporate high yield, and the historical loss rates are significantly lower at equivalent credit ratings. A high-yield municipal ETF in the current environment is generating tax-free yields in the 5 to 6% range, which at the 24% bracket converts to a tax-equivalent yield of 6.5 to 7.9%. For investors with the risk tolerance to accept below investment-grade municipal credit exposure, the after-tax yield advantage over comparable corporate high-yield alternatives is substantial and specifically powerful in an inflationary environment, where the marginal real return on every basis point of additional yield is doing compounding work over a multi-decade holding period. The combined portfolio case for these four categories is not about picking the single highest-yielding option and concentrating everything there. It is about building a layered tax-free income structure where the broad investment-grade national exposure provides the core, the short-duration component provides principal stability during rate volatility, the essential service revenue component provides the most defensive income quality within the structure, and the high-yield municipal component provides the yield density necessary to generate after-tax income that meaningfully exceeds the current inflation rate. At a blended tax-equivalent yield of 5.5 to 6% across these four categories, an investor in the 24% bracket is generating income that, for the first time in the current inflationary environment, actually outpaces the combination of inflation and tax friction rather than being consumed by it. The portfolio is not just producing a yield number, it is producing a real return. A genuine, measurable, after-tax, after-inflation expansion of purchasing power. That is the specific outcome that the standard high-yield taxable dividend ETF approach is failing to produce for most investors right now. Not because the gross yields are insufficient, but because the tax structure consuming those yields has eliminated the real return that the gross yield number implied. The full breakdown of the specific ETFs within each of these four categories, tickers, current yields, tax-equivalent yield calculations at multiple brackets, duration profiles, and credit quality metrics, is coming in the next video. But before that goes up, I want to know exactly where you are sitting in this calculation.